This is In-Ear Insights, the Trust Insights podcast. In this week's In-Ear Insights, Google Analytics 4 has added in attribution modeling, which has been something that was missing at launch, and it is now available. So we figured we'd take some time today to walk through it, what's in it, what's not in it, and some important considerations. Now, for those folks who are listening, you'll want to hop on over to our YouTube channel over at trustinsights.ai/YouTube. Because I'm going to share, we're going to sort of walk through this on screen. So again, that's trustinsights.ai/YouTube. We can see the video, but we'll talk through it as well. So I'm going to start with this. This is the standard Ga4 interface. Now, Katie, when you look at this, where would you expect attribution to be?
Oh, that is a great question. So full disclosure, I am not super familiar with the Ga4 interface. So Chris is not asking me trick questions. I am just like any other marketer who this is new to. So I see things like life cycle, acquisition, engagement, monetization, retention, and then user demographics and tech. None of these really scream attribution to me. I mean, you could say life cycle, maybe acquisition or retention, user tech, but I know from using GA3 that that's really going to be things like what device. So yeah, my guess would be under the life cycle menu, acquisition.
And here is the problem with Google Analytics 4 attribution. That ain't it. You have to go to the upper menus where you see Reports, Explore, Advertising, and Configure, and then it is in Advertising. So even though the entire section is about attribution, it's called Advertising. I don't know why it's labeled that. Folks from Google Analytics team, if you are watching this, please consider renaming this section to Attribution so that people know that that's what it is, because it is actually, in fact, okay.
Well, I can understand, I can see the other side of it, because advertising, at least to you and I, Chris, assumes that there's money involved. So paid ads, those kinds of things. But advertising is really just another term for marketing, which is essentially what this breaks down to, which is how did you reach your customers? How did you advertise yourself to them, whether there was money or not money behind it? And so did you advertise using email? Did you advertise using organic search? Did you advertise through your partner network? And so I can draw the line and the logical conclusion. Do I think that it's intuitive based on how we've been trained to think about attribution? Absolutely not. But I can understand why it's been called advertising. This is sort of, not to go too deep down a rabbit hole, but one of the issues with change management is inconsistent things. And so for years, it's been called attribution. And now they've just made the decision without communicating. Now it's called advertising. And so that's a problem. So none of us know how to find the thing except for Chris, who literally clicks every button and says, what does this button do?
And here's the funny part. I'm going to go into my my settings for my property. And if I look here, there's a section called Attribution Settings. So it should say, advertising settings. And in here, right, of course, you can go in and set like the things that you would expect in your attribution model. But that's not what that's labeled in the actual application. So yeah, a little bit of a change management / who moved my cheese moment. So you look puzzled, Katie. What's up?
Well, it's funny because in thinking through the inconsistencies, and so it's called advertising, but then when you look at the actual sub menu, it's called attribution again. And so one might say that this is just a QA issue and it was meant to be called attribution, but somebody said, oh, advertising, the word spelled correctly. Great, check that box. So just, sort of thinking out loud as to why this came about. It could be a mistake.
It very well could be. So what do we have in here? Well, obviously everything in this is contingent upon you having set up conversions. If you didn't set up conversions, which are Ga4 goals, this section will be completely unhelpful. So let's go ahead and just see what conversions I've got set up. There are 4 in here that do not matter, that are just pollution in my account because I integrated Firebase for no good reason. Don't do that, by the way. It's just bad for your analytics. So I got purchase, which is someone buying a book, downloading a file, subscribing to my newsletter, or going to my public speaking page to book some speaking. And what we see here right away is conversions by default channel grouping. Well, we all thought, hey, default channel groupings were going away, right? That's what we thought, because in GA3, one of the things that's really tricky is you have to get your default channel groupings correct, or the application doesn't show them correctly. So they're back here in GA4, like, well, where did this come from? If you look at the help files, GA4 has default channel groupings now, and they list through like what's in this functionality. The part that was surprising to me was that default channel groupings. Let's look at this. Oops, GA4 is that unlike Google Analytics 3, GA4 default channel groupings are not case sensitive and cannot be edited. So what this means is that you have to get your source medium pairings correct and matching what Google says they must be for your default channel groupings to work properly. If you don't do that, your report's just going to be wrong and you can't fix it.
So given that, so this is the current state today, given the way that Google is rolling out some of these features, I think there is a likelihood that somewhere down the line in the future, you could edit the channel groupings, but just not today. So if you are using the GA4 data, then as Chris says, you have to get your source medium correct. But with the caveat, they have to match the way that Google is defining them, not just how you're defining them for your company. And that's, that's problematic because that's a whole new way of learning for a lot of people. Like, we know that a lot of companies are now just getting used to, okay, let me just standardize how we're using source medium. Great. Now they have to relearn it all over again because Google's once again changed the rules.
Exactly. So the one thing that I would say there is that you can't do it on the snapshot page, but later on you can say, let's just use medium instead. So if you've got a source medium hierarchy that works for you, you can just ignore Google's default channel groupings. The danger is, of course, that if you have somebody who's not trained, they'll use the defaults and the defaults are wrong. So in the attribution, we have the usual model comparison tool, and what we've got here are the same models that everyone should be used to from previous versions of Google Analytics. Last click, first click, linear attribution, position-based and time decay. And if you want a refresher on this, we have, I don't know, like any number of podcasts and some webinars and things on what these different attribution models mean. The model comparison tool is somewhat helpful in terms of just figuring out which of these models is sort of best reflects reality. For my personal website here, we see that email gets slightly more credit than it should. We see that referral gets slightly less credit than it should. And organic social gets slightly less credit than it should. But again, we can change this to either medium or source medium if you want to get more granular, which I think is probably more useful.
What's interesting too is it looks like maybe I'm mistaken, it looks like they've added a new model that gives more priority to ads. But if we're clear, when the ads preferred model is only Google ads, it's not other types of paid advertising. So proceed with caution. Google is giving themselves the most credit if you choose to let them.
Yes. In fact, if you look at the default channel grouping, some of these, like paid search, video, and display, require the Google ad network, right? Mm-hmm. So it is not any advertising that's displayed. It's only Google's. So just be aware of that there is definitely a bias built into the tool.
Mm-hmm. But because they're Google, they can do that.
Exactly. It's their tool, and you're getting it for free, so you can't really complain like, I'm not getting what I pay for, because you're paying nothing for it.
Right.
Now, the conversion paths, this is a somewhat of an improvement over the previous versions. I'm going to go ahead and change this from default channel grouping to medium, because again, they've got all those mediums that may or may not be approved, and you can choose the model. I of these models, the one that's least bad, and we've said this a lot, the one that's least bad is time decay. And what this now does is this part here is still unhelpful, right? There's, just the number of times something happened, but you now have sort of a funnelish view of your mediums to see, like, well, what medium at each of these given touch points is helping move things along, helping convert. So for let's just go. I'm going to just go ahead and do just people subscribing to my newsletter. I think that's an easy thing. So in the beginning, referral, it sort of introduces people to the newsletter. In the middle, not a whole lot happens, and then sort of last touch. You can see 2/3 of my conversion touch points are sort of last touch points. None. There is no medium, and I know what that is. That is actually social media, because I screwed up one of my click tracking things on my personal website, which states the importance of having good governance. And then referral, email, and then organic search. What I find interesting here is that from a medium basis, organic search really isn't showing up a whole lot here. And this conflicts with reality. In looking at attribution models from GA3 and our own attribution models from our website, this does not match up with what we've seen and pretty much know to be true about my website.
So why is that? I know, if I go back a couple of steps, I know that one of the issues with GA3 and the default channel grouping is that there's a lot of problems with it straight out of the box, which is why we always counsel and coach people to modify it so that it's collecting data correctly. And so I guess my first question is, in GA4, how confident are you in the default channel grouping that's out of the box, given that you can't edit it? We know that in GA3, email is a problem. We know that social is a problem. And then I guess my next question is, what's the disconnect between GA3 and GA4 in terms of this data? It's the same data, theoretically.
It is. So how confident am I in it? I don't know the underlying model, so I have no confidence in it because I don't know how it works, right? It's a black box. If I knew for sure what it was and how it worked and sort of the underlying basics of the model, I might have more confidence in. I am making the assumption, and this is an assumption because it's not published anywhere in Google's documentation, that it's still using the same models from the old Google attribution product, which was using Shapley values. But even that doesn't necessarily, again, match up. When I look at the Markov chain model version that we use for my newsletter, it is a very different story because it looks at across all the different touch points, early, middle, and late, to say, like, this channel does the most heavy lifting. And we can see here that organic search is 57% of the driver's conversion, whereas here, it's a tiny little bit, 1% of early touch points and 3% of late touch points. That doesn't match up. So I don't know why this is the case. And I can't explain it because I don't know what the underlying model is. All I can say is that we are working with theoretically the same data, right? Because our Markov chain modeling pulls from Google Analytics data, right? So it's not like it's pulling from some different data sources. It's all the same data set. Why this is the case, I don't know.
Well, and I guess my question wasn't around your confidence in the model. My question was around your confidence in the way that in Google Analytics 4, Google has classified the different data points. And so that was back to sort of the default channel grouping that you can't edit.
I'm not using default channel groupings, though. I'm using source medium here in this section because I know default channel groupings are wrong.
So every single data point that you're looking at has been categorized then by you through a UTM tag.
That's correct, or a known source. So when we turn on, default channel groupings, we now have referral, organic search, organic social, etc. Again, based on Google's definitions and unassigned. Mm-hmm. And even here, this still doesn't match up with reality.
So, not letting my anxiety get the best of me. If I'm, if I'm someone who's being asked to look at this information and make a decision with it, I don't know that I can do that because based on what I'm being told by you, someone who knows Google Analytics inside and out, you can't yet trust the data. So what am I, someone who doesn't know it as well, supposed to do about it?
Right. So I don't know. I honestly don't know what to say, except that you probably want more than one source of attribution modeling, something to triangulate on. So I'm hoping that you took our advice and you didn't just turn off your GA3 account, right? Because obviously you can go back to GA3 and look at the same data. In fact, I'm actually curious to see what that would look like. So let's go to my old GA3 account.
Well, and I guess that's, one of the points that we want to drive home is GA4 is still very much almost experimental at this point. Not all the features are rolled out. We didn't know if attribution model was coming back, and lo and behold, there it is. However, there are still some challenges with it in terms of its intuitiveness, in terms of the data that is being brought in, and in terms of the underlying model. And so while we're sharing this information with you about Google Analytics 4, and we still encourage you to set up a parallel instance, that's what it should be, parallel to Google Analytics 3. So now is not the time to abandon ship on GA3 and go to GA4.
Yeah. So I just looking very quickly, organic search ranked a lot higher in GA3. So there's a definite difference between these two models. GA3's models are older. They don't use, I would assume, again, this is an assumption, they're not using the same machine learning models that GA4 is. So the big question that we need to ask and our friends at Google is, what is the underlying architecture of the GA4 attribution model? And again, they don't have to give away all the secrets and say it's exactly this. Just what family of classification is it? Is it Markov chains? Is it Shapley values? Is it a neural network? If we know that, then we can start to say, okay, well, based on how we know that model works, then this answer may or may not be sensible, or at least get some insight into essentially how the attribution model is coming up with its decisions. But to your point, Katie, right now, I would be real hesitant to make decisions on that model because it would say effectively that organic social is the thing for early funnel interactions on my newsletter. And I know for sure, again, because we've built our own models, that is very much not the case in any way, shape, or form. Organic social typically, at least for this example, which is my personal website, does horribly bad compared to organic search, compared to real referral traffic and stuff. And it would lead me to making a bad decision, a decision that would not be productive.
So let me reverse the conversation a little bit. So we're talking about Google Analytics 4 and our inability to feel confident in the data right now. How confident are you in the accuracy of the data in Google Analytics 3?
In the underlying data for my website, I am very confident in it. Like the data that we pull out through the API and use for the Trust Insights attribution modeling, I am very confident in that because it's one of those things where as you're writing the code, you have to hand inspect the data coming in to make sure that it's structured properly and things. And I am very confident in that data. And by extension, I am confident that what GA3 is processing and displaying is correct. It makes mathematical sense. You look at the underlying data, and the underlying data looks good. It's not full of weird garbage, and it makes intuitive sense too, based on things like we've run. For our site, for my own website, I've run surveys to my audience. I've asked people. We've run focus groups and things, and we can see the attribution data from people themselves saying like, yeah, this is how I found you, or this is how I heard of you. Again, that one thing that we constantly tell people all the time, always, as much as possible, have a little thing on every form that says, how did you hear about us? And let people tell you how they heard about you is so valuable for calibrating your attribution models. Because you're right, Katie, if you didn't have that other data, you could have two different attribution models. You wouldn't know which one's correct because you have no source of truth. But when people say, I searched for you, like, okay, so clearly the model that says search is the thing is probably more accurate than the model that where that's not the case.
And I think that that's an important part of this as well, is there's a lot of trust in what the machines spit out because it's machine learning, it's AI, it must be correct. And so I think that it's a good practice to question it and make sure that there's some sort of other validation that the data is accurate. And so that's sort of the second piece, I think, of the point that we're making here is number one, make sure that you haven't turned off Google Analytics 3 because Google Analytics 4, while it's good, it's not where it needs to be yet. And then the second is if your spidey senses are telling you it's not right, it's probably not right. So having that second data source in Google Analytics 3, having that third data source in customer feedback data directly from the customers is going to continue to validate whether or not the information coming out of this big black box machine learning thing is correct or not. And so what we're seeing, at least in the initial, is we don't feel confident that the data coming out of Google Analytics 4 for attribution modeling is correct yet.
Exactly right. And I can't underscore that third data source enough. You've got to ask people, how did you hear about us? What made you come in today? Why did you choose us? It is such important information because it is the customer telling you, it's not relying on an intermediary. Because again, as much as we love Google Analytics and as much as we love the team there and the way they do their work, they are still an intermediary between us and the customer. Right? As marketers, they still are interpreting the customer, and there is never any intermediary that is better than talking to the customer directly.
I agree with that. And I think that sort of goes back to one of the underlying pieces of knowledge about how machine learning works. Machine learning is only as good as the data that you feed it. And so it starts with the customer self-report information. And so if the data coming out of the machine learning model and the data that your customers are reporting is mismatching, which one do you think is wrong?
Yep. And again, there's other pieces of software. If you're using a CRM, a marketing automation system like Mautic or HubSpot or Marketo, those pieces of software also have their own attribution modeling. Salesforce.com has its own attribution modeling. And you may want to put a few of these models together, side by side, say, okay, which ones here agree with each other, which ones don't. I think that's a valuable exercise. But again, your ground source of truth has to be what the customer told you. And that's a great way to evaluate all these different models, is to say, okay, here's what customers have told us. Which model most correlates to what the customers told us? If you can do that, you'll be in a really good condition for saying which pieces of software should we trust to make decisions, particularly if we're talking about, like, say you've got a $50,000 budget on, advertising this quarter. If one model says spend it all on Facebook and another model says spend it all on LinkedIn, well, who do you believe? Because if you're wrong, you've blown 50 grand.
Right. So back to the original point of this podcast is, surprise, Google Analytics 4 introduced attribution modeling. They called it advertising, and we're not sure if it's wholly accurate as of yet.
Exactly. So do that homework. And again, if you have not asked your customers how they heard about you, now is the time. What's the expression, Katie? Like, today is the day.
Today is a great day to start fixing things.
Exactly. Today is the day to put that on your forms, to ask people in a newsletter survey, to float a poll on your social media accounts. Today, which is, we're recording this on August 16th. August 16th is the day for you to start collecting that customer data.
That's right.
If you got any questions about anything we've talked about today in today's show, please join us over at the Analytics for Marketers Slack group. Totally free. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you can join over 1,900 other professionals in talking about all of the marketing and analytics challenges you're facing. And wherever it is that you're tuning into our show today, if there's a challenge you prefer to receive on, we're probably there too. Go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, and you can find the show in any number of formats. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Need help making your marketing platforms, processes, and people work smarter? Visit trustinsights.ai today and learn how we can help you deliver more impact.